Good morning, everyone. Morena. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting on the 11th of May. And I'd particularly like to welcome all of those who are joining us online as well. So could I just remind everyone to have your cell phones off and to use your microphones when you are speaking. Thank you. Now, I would like to call for apologies. I have one from Councillor Tapsell, and I know that two of our members will be joining Councillor Tapsell at the Community Board conference later today. So thank you. That's Mr. Phil Thomas and Mrs. Shirley Trumper. Excellent. And I also have an apology from Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Oh, I've got an extra
Yes.
apology from Eugene Berryman Camp, who passed his apologies on to Councillor Raukawa-Tait. It might not have gotten through to you.
Thank you, Ms Morrison. Thank you. So thank you, Councillor Sturt. Moving. Seconder, please. Thank you, Mr Thomas. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Thank you. Now, I'd like to ask, are there any declarations of interest for anyone today? No, there appear to be none. Excellent, thank you. And are there any urgent items not on the agenda? Yes, Ms Morrison.
In addition to the two that I emailed through to you, which were perhaps an update on how we're going with our policy review work plan, I just seen in the paper recently around bilingual signage or bilingual policy, and I was just wondering if sometime if it would be appropriate to discuss or to understand where the council's at, or if they've started considering that concept.
That's a very good issue to raise, Ms Morrison, and I will leave it to the Chief Executive to decide where and when that gets discussed. You're happy with that? We could put that on the end of the agenda today, if you would like to do that. All right. Yep. Lovely. All right. Now, we were to have a hearing this morning for submissions to the water, let me just get this right here, the Water Services and Trade Waste Bylaw 2010 review, and we had one submitter, a Mr Craig Morley, who unfortunately is now unable to attend. Now, his submission is in our agenda and may be read online. We received one other submission, and those submissions will be the dates for those. The 8th of June is when the deliberations for that bylaw will be had, and on the 29th of June, the decisions for the Trade Waste Water Services bylaw. So, unless there are any questions, I think we will just move on from that. I don't think that we do need to move that the submissions have been received, because they just come in as per other submissions. So it was simply that we had allowed Mr Morley time to present his submission, but he's unable to be here. Okay, that's on page 7 for those, if you want to reference that. All right, so we'll move on to number 5, the confirmation of minutes, which is on page 7, and that's the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 3rd of April. Yes, Councillor Johnson.
I just note in those meetings there was a presentation which didn't occur, which was on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council's annual plan, and the Chair advised it would be given at a later date. Do we know when that's going to happen?
Madam Chair, no, we don't at this stage. I'll follow up on that and just confirm when that is. But obviously we've got the two opportunities coming up with the next O&M or the following SPNF.
Yes, Councillor Sturt.
Under 6.2, we had the statement of intent for the council-controlled organisations for the year. I just wanted to get my head around it. How often do they report back through my committee to update us on where they're at with their KPIs?
They report back quarterly, Councillor Sturt. Yes. Yes, Councillor Gould.
Thank you. Bay of Plenty Regional Councillor from Tauranga informed me last Friday that the submission process at the Bay of Plenty Regional Council have closed.
Thank you for that. Yes, a press release went out to that effect, and I believe it went to all councillors, so that's that's good information. Thank you for that. Are there any other amendments or issues with the minutes? No. In that case, I'll have a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson and Mayor Chadwick. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Thank you. Okay, so we have, we'll move now on to staff reports. Page 15. Sorry, and may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report from the Rotorua Air Quality Bylaw? Councillor Donaldson, Mr. Thomas, thank you. Thank you. We have a presentation this morning from Karen Purcell from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, and sitting with Karen is Rosemary Viskovich from Rotorua Lakes Council. Thank you and good morning, ladies. We'll just make sure we've got an active microphone down there.
Okay, thank you for that. So, good morning, councillors. I have with me Karen Purcell. Karen is part of the working party that both Regional Council and Rotorua Lakes Council have around the air quality bylaw and all the work that goes on in the background there. So Karen's going to be presenting. She's the person who knows this in great detail and has done a lot of the research behind it. But this has been through the working party, of which Councillor Tapsell and Councillor Donaldson are our representatives.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'd also like to offer the apologies of Councillor Thurston. He is the chair of the working party, and I'm sure he would love to be here, but he's attending his son's graduation overseas. So, yeah. So I just thought I'd start with a wee bit of history. Talks of the bylaw started with the Rotorua Air Quality Joint Committee, which was in about 2008. And it's made up of a similar set of members to the current working party. So it's both councils, the District Health Board and the Ministry for the Environment. That committee developed and endorsed the bylaw, and of course this council approved that in 2010. And we were targeting new burners, restricting what could be installed in houses, requiring an upgrade of a burner at the point of sale of a property, and a phase out of all indoor open fires. And from that bylaw, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council was contracted to administer and enforce that bylaw. So the implementation has been very successful of that bylaw. We have successfully phased out 850 indoor open fires, so they're no longer being used. For those of you unaware, indoor open fires are one of the most polluting forms of home heating, and also probably the most inefficient. The point of sale rule has converted about 505 old burners to either modern burners or to, say, heat pumps or similar things. And this is not an insignificant number. That is a really good number and quite a surprisingly large number. We didn't think it was going to do that much, but it has been really successful. However, the bylaw is due for review this year and needs to be all finished by September this year. So we've been looking at that. So the working party we've all put our heads together and looking at all our options. Now, at the same time, the air plan, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council air plan, has been reviewed and a draft released, and we are looking to notify that about October this year. It's been pushed back a little bit, simply waiting for this bylaw to go through. We don't want an overloaded community. So we've been looking at options for the regional rules, and at the same time, we have looked at options for the bylaw. So we looked at three main options. One was to retain the bylaw as it is. That would be good for the community because there's no change, good for us because there's no change in implementation. However, we would then lose the opportunity to resolve any issues that we had with that and to maybe tighten up some rules and have a bit more of an effect. The next option, of course, was to mirror the bylaw to the rules, have exactly the same rules in the bylaw as the regional rules. However, we all felt that was a step too far. There are some quite hard rules for the regional plan, and we decided it wouldn't be fair to the community to put that through a bylaw process. We preferred to go through the full RMA public process with that. So the more moderate version in between, so the option was to simply amend it, ensure the rules in the bylaw are consistent with each other, but not require the removal of any existing burners other than under the point of sale rule. So the Working Party chose option 3, and we presented this option to a workshop of this council in March, and it was also endorsed by that workshop. So I'll just outline the key changes to the bylaw, starting with the point of sale rule. The indoor open fires used to be able to be replaced. Now we are requiring them to be rendered inoperable, and they can no longer be replaced. The community has had 2 years now to phase those out and stop using them and to replace them with something else, and we felt that was sufficient time for them to find an alternative. It also applies to all buildings. There was a bit of a grey area. It said dwelling houses, and we weren't sure exactly what dwelling houses meant, so we've just widened it to say and buildings, which clears that up. And we've put in a clause requiring photographic or written evidence to be provided to us. Most people were doing that anyway, but it just made it a lot easier to have it written down in black and white in the rules. We did investigate changing the responsibility for ensuring the change was made from the vendor, who is currently responsible for it, to the purchaser. That was more legally viable. We could follow people up. Purchaser was on site. There was a whole bunch of reasons why we thought that was good. We had some really good discussion with Councillor Sturt, who his expertise in real estate said, look, it's working well as it is, and it would just overcomplicate it. So when we looked at how many issues we had, turned out we'd only had a few properties that weren't complying with that bylaw. If you talk to Tasman District Council, who has a point of sale rule where the purchaser is responsible, they have 6 months worth of following up to do, probably into the years now. So it's much easier to do it when it's sold, the end. So we changed that back to what the original bylaw says. The new burner rule has had a change. New burners are now limited to pellet burners. Previously we were allowing any burner that complied with the national standards. It's moved on since then. The national standards are quite old, and technology of burners is far better now. So we've upgraded our rule to fit with the technology changes. And also burners may only replace existing burners. Previously they were allowed to be installed in even when someone didn't have an existing burner in place. And we've tightened up that design standard of replacement burners to 0.5. Currently the limit is 1.5 grams. But as I said, technology's moved on since then. No change to the indoor open fire phase out, that stays the same. And we've added some minor changes to the interpretation, added some definitions that were required due to these the changes to the bylaw. Also included was the statement of proposal that's required for public participation. That includes, of course, all required draft of bylaw, the reasons for the proposal, appropriateness of bylaw, and a summary of the review process and submissions. And finally, for my part, we put together, the Local Government Act allows the contracting of the administration and enforcement of the bylaw, and that was currently sitting with the Regional Council, and our recommendation, it's been working perfectly fine, and our recommendation is to keep it to that arrangement.
Thank you, Karen. Rosemary, is there anything else you'd like to add? No? That's good. All right, I'm going to open it up for questions. Mayor Chadwick first.
I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm just a bit concerned about the pellet burners, because I hear people trying to burn other things in there, and then damaging the effective outcome. And the other aspect that I'm really concerned about is these are expensive, and we've lost the subsidy now, haven't we, through Healthy Homes for replacement to burners?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. We still have all the incentives running. We still have the hot swap loan, and we also have rates rebates options for people who are very low income.
Yep.
And we have grants. And the grants at the moment are providing ultra low emission burners, which are just standard wood burners but with a better design, we think. And I share your concerns with the pellet burners. We did a trial many years ago where we installed pellet burners into Housing New Zealand homes, and of course the price of pellets rose dramatically after that, and they couldn't afford to buy them. And there were the whole range of issues with that trial. And Housing New Zealand, of course, have reported back to us that they do have issues with that. Pellet burners are more the option for higher income. Ideally, our initial proposal was to not allow any new burners in at all. However, pellet burners are the one type of burner we know generally, when you're burning the
Well
right
used.
stuff, will burn the same in real life as it does in the laboratory tests, whereas, of course, wood burners burn very, very differently depending on what you put on it.
Yep.
So this is an emerging issue, the new pellets coming in from China. We don't know what they have in them. They might have glues, all sorts of stuff. So there's an option to not allow any new burners in, other than pellet burners, but we thought it was good to allow some option of solar fuel burning.
And maybe the working party may have canvassed this, but I asked the question, what are we trying to solve here? And we all know about the air quality and the impact on health. I'm more worried about those that then decide we're not going to have a heating system. We simply can't afford it. And then we've got the issue of overcrowding, damp homes and cold homes. So where we're trying to solve the air quality issue around particulate matter and people with asthma and other respiratory conditions, we're creating them through a backdoor of poverty. And that's something that I'm really concerned about, and we should be. Have you looked at that impact?
Yeah, I think we have. I just wanted to add there that our Eco Design Advisor service, it's very new. The first assessments they've been doing are all the people applying for hot swap loans and getting independent advice about the appropriate heating in those homes. So it's independent advice saying these are the rules, this is how some education as well, this is how you use your heating effectively, this will be the best option for your circumstances, all those kinds of things. And I think there are a range of support options for people with low income, quite a range that I think is pretty well supported.
Of anybody that's deciding, even with all the options, it's too expensive and costly because of the cost of living, and we're not going to have a heating system.
I'm not aware of that issue. It's always been an overriding principle that we weren't going to have clean air at the expense of warm homes, hence the introduction of all those incentives. If there is a house with an existing burner and they're very low income, they always have the option to put in another burner, a replacement burner, just a more modern one. When it comes to the new burner rule, what we're looking at are the houses that haven't been built yet, or the houses that haven't ever had a burner in there, so they must have some alternative. So if they've had that alternative, I mean, a new house is going to have double glazing and full insulation, and the heat pump will be very, very efficient. And for those other older houses, of course, if they have a burner, there's always the option to replace that burner.
Councillor Sturt.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy with the alterations that you've gone back to at point of sale rather than putting it on the purchase, because I would have shared exactly the concerns Her Worship had in terms of affordability, particularly with first home buyers. Under 6.2, you've got, and I'll quote, indoor open fires must now be rendered inoperable and may no longer be replaced with any type of solid fuel burner. So you've got a gaping hole where a fireplace was in your lounge. You're telling me you cannot replace that with a compliant solid fuel burner? And when does the policing start on rendering those open fires? Recently I did a pre-home inspection at 8 o'clock in the morning in Ream Street. Ream Street is out Ofot opposite Regency Park. And I looked west towards Rotorua City, and I saw at least 3 industrial sites burning with no particulate problem on them, and smoke drifting right across the city. I couldn't get, because my camera was in my car, and the stairs and with my leg and all that, I couldn't get down there quick enough. But that has got to be also dealt with in terms of particulates. It's all very well, and I'm pleased that the bylaw's been updated and changed. The other thing is, whilst you're thinking about that, I'm just a little bit confused on page 19 under 2, and I'll quote, wood burners may be permitted providing they replace a wood burner, coal burner or multi-fuel burner They may not replace indoor open fires nor any type of solid fuel burner that is designed for a purpose besides space heating. I find that conflicting. So can you help me with that one, please?
Okay, I think the first question was to confirm that indoor open burners can no longer be replaced with any type of solid fuel burner, that they need to look at alternatives. They were phased out in 2015, about May 2015. Our hot swap loans will no longer pay for a replacement for those. It's just a policy that's steadily come in that needed to be confirmed in the regulations. The second one was outdoor burning, policing. Was it of the indoor? Yeah. We always had a 3-year phase-in for hardline enforcement. The first 2 years were always going to be about light-handed enforcement and education. We are looking at our enforcement of those indoor open fires. We're looking at methods of how we can find out those houses that have them. It's reasonably simple to see from the outside. A chimney with no flue, no retrofitted flue, is clear. A big chimney is clearly an indoor open fire. So we will be looking into that. Marion's working on that right now. And was there a third? What was the third question? Oh, yes, that's right. The difference between those is, and I was very, very specific with that because it can get confusing very quickly, and it's even confusing still. The space heating is, we're not allowing replacement of, say, the chip heaters or the coal ranges. So things that are used primarily for cooking or for heating water, we're not allowing replacement of. However, we are, if someone, say, has a Marshall heater that heats water that goes through a radiator system, that's still considered space heating. So we're looking to only replace like for like. That was the purpose of the stepping it all out.
Following up, Madam Chair, if I could, just quickly. So if in my house I've got an open fire, I've got to decommission that. I've got a chip heater as well. I can decommission the open fire and replace that with a pellet fire if I've got a hearth, etc. But I can leave the chip heater going?
Yes, currently, unless you sell your house. Currently, you can keep the chip heater as long as you're not using the indoor open fire, but you replace the indoor open fire with if you have replaced it, indoor open fire with a pellet burner, but eventually, if you're under the point of sale rule, you would have to remove your chip heater as well.
Most houses that were built prior to 1970 have got both.
Yeah, we found
an
quite a
open
few.
fire and a chip heater, because the chip heater heated the hot water cylinder. And that raises the issue that Her Worship was alluding to, the economics of a lot of people have saved thousands and thousands of dollars through not using electricity to heat the hot water cylinder by using a chip heater to heat the hot water. That option is now going to be taken away from them. So the social and economic ramifications of this are going to be felt over the next 5 to 10 years, I would say. And hopefully you'll give time for this to bed in. The other thing is, I know of 2 houses where their main source of cooking and their main source of heating is a fantastic $30,000 coal range that's been in the house for 8 to 10 years. You have got some flexibility in terms of that.
Yeah, for both of those situations, there's an option to apply for a dispensation, and under the regional rules, there will be an option to apply for a resource consent. So there will always be exceptional circumstances, and we've ensured not to close the door on those. So, for example, the regional plan says non-complying activity, which leaves it open for resource consent, rather than prohibited, which completely closes it. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Surt. Councillor Gould.
Much. I've got a number of questions, so I'll ask one at a time so it's easier for you. The U burners limited to pellet burners which you had on your screen, and with any burners put in since 2005, are there any burners on the market which can heat the house without being pellet burners? Because Rotorua's got an abundant supply of wood, and this council's got a policy of wood first.
There are burners that will heat the entire house, not necessarily pellet burners. I'm not sure. They have improved a lot. They used to be quite low wattage, but they have improved immeasurably. And there's also an option. There's also pellet boilers. For example, quite a few of the schools have been converted to boilers. So there will be options to use pellets to heat more than just one room.
Second question is, I was at a community meeting on the 1st of May this month, and one of the committee members, who's a government worker, wasn't aware of this policy. He owned a house with a pre-2005 burner. He wasn't aware that he had to replace it by August next year. So is there something lacking in your advertising or marketing of the particular policy?
Sorry, what did you say that he had existing? Did he have an indoor open fire existing? Oh. At this stage, they don't need to be replaced unless the house is sold. We're not requiring a phase out of those at this stage under the bylaw. We did have a talk with Councillor Sturt about, for example, our marketing with our point of sale rule. We think it's time for a refresher to go out to real estate agents and lawyers and the community in general to just remind them that this is out there.
If his house after August next year, he's got to stop using that particular fire because of EU bylaw, is that correct?
No. At this stage, the bylaw does not phase out any existing burners other than indoor open fires unless the house is sold. The draft air plan does have a rule that may require that.
Another question is that in February this year you had the home show brought in by a Taupo agent, which you had a staff member with an open fire on display with all the questions and answers and everything to the people walking past. Are you going to have the same sort of show for the Daily Post home show in July?
Yes, we are gearing up for that. We will have staff members there. I don't think we'll have an open fire there though.
And further question, on page 24, there's a mistake with the number. You've got Quality Control Bylaw 20170, but it has been corrected on page 44 to 2017.
Question you didn't answer was regarding Ngāpuna, and what are you doing about that particular matter that's going into our atmosphere? And I understand the readings in summer, when people aren't using burners, is only slightly lower than in full winter burns, and that is one of the reasons. What are you doing about controlling that without putting all those people out of work? That is a real issue for me.
Yeah, we have done a lot of work in Ngāpuna. It was a few years ago, and we did have exceedances, summer exceedances, and they were caused by fugitive emissions in the Ngāpuna industrial area. So we sent in, we did quite a number of things, surveys, and we sent people in to work personally with all of the sites that we thought were the cause of it, and even those sites that were the recipients of the dust, we made it everybody's responsibility to clean up the dust, even if it didn't come from them. They sort of say, oh, well, it's their fault. And we said, well, you need to clean that up because it's just going to turn into a problem. And it was amazingly messy, and I used to drive through and think, what is going on in there? And now we have a dedicated compliance officer that actually goes out and visits these people. They all have personalised dust monitoring plans and dust management plans. And as far as we know, that has been a success. Again, that's another thing that probably needs a bit of a refresher. And we've just had another compliance officer assigned to that. He's also in charge of the Tauranga Mount Maunganui area, which is having the same issues. So we are very well aware of it. Outdoor burning is another thing we are looking to phase out, particularly urban, and the Ngāpuna area will fall into that category.
Just your compliance officer come over on a Friday afternoon when they do their outdoor burning.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt. It's a little bit outside of our bylaw today, but a related matter. Councillor Kent, then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My main concern is with the rather draconian rule that a new building can only install a pellet burner. Now, surely my information is that pellet burners are already passé technology internationally, and there are much better burners already coming along. To actually say that you can only put in a pellet burner, isn't that just saying holding us in the past?
There is a reason for that. At the moment, they're working on what's called an ultra-low emissions burner. Canterbury Regional Council introduced a new method, and with wood burners, just the standard wood burners, how they test in a laboratory with set size of wood, set moisture content, and under a set burning regime, they burn very, very well. And that's where you get the 0.5 grams per kilogram. However, in real life, they burn very, very differently. About 4.5 grams per kilogram is the average, and it gets up to huge amounts, like 30 sometimes, depending on what people put in. So at the time, the pellet burners are the ones, they test at 1.5 grams per kilogram, no matter what, even in real life. Obviously, when you're using the pellets you're supposed to use. So the next technology are the ultra-low emissions burners. However, the method is designed to be more like real-life testing. Canterbury are still revisiting their method, and it's not necessarily the most repeatable, robust method. So we have commissioned a consultant to come into Rotorua, and he should be gearing up now to test 10 of those ultra-low emissions burners in homes in Rotorua in real life, in low-income homes. So we want to see what, so that's the latest and greatest, but we're not quite sure how they perform. So when we have the results of that, we will definitely look at an option for those. I mean, because that's why Canterbury have introduced those, to allow those burners to be installed. The idea of restricting burners is we're just trying to stop new burners being put into an already over-allocated airshed. When people are building a new house, that's their best time to choose their heating systems and where you've got the best insulation and things like that in. And basically, if you have someone, presumably a high-income person, building a new house and putting in a pellet burner, a burner introducing all these emissions, that means two poorer people are going to have to give up their burners. That's sort of how we look at it. So when you've got all the options in front of you, we're trying to push people to make a cleaner air option.
Then based on that, shouldn't the bylaw be stating or an approved burner, not just you can only put in pellet burners in a new house?
An approved burner will still be a wood burner. And that we still consider those to be polluting. So we would rather restrict.
But you've already said that new technology is coming along with low emission burners. Now, presumably some of those are actually going to test as actually better than pellet burners, sooner or later.
Yeah.
So should we not actually allow for that in the bylaw now, not prohibit their future use and have to change the bylaw again when they finally come on the scene?
The issue is we just don't know how they're going to perform. Some initial results show that they can be good and they can be worse.
But why are you prohibiting them by the wording of the bylaw? That's stupid.
If they're prohibited to start with, if we open it up now and allow them in now, then they'll just put them in now, whether we know it or not, and they may not turn out to be very good.
You are missing the point. You are totally missing the point. The point is, if new approved burners come along, the bylaw should allow for them, not prohibit them.
Councillor Kent, we do have an opportunity to put a review clause into the bylaw, and so should some come online, and should the information from Canterbury be robust enough that we can adopt it here for our community, and we're doing this trial, then we can revisit this aspect of the bylaw quite simply.
We wait another 3 years for another review before we change it? Surely we should actually implement it in the bylaw now, that if an approved burner comes along that's quite happy to use, it's compliant, then the law should allow it, not prohibit it.
I think the problem is trying to define a burner that doesn't necessarily exist yet is extremely difficult without opening the door to all of them. The Working Party's preference was that no new burners were allowed in the airshed.
I'm missing the point. That's not what I'm saying. If you approve one, the law should allow it to be put in.
So you would say
whether you approve one or not, it doesn't
Councillor
matter.
Kent, I think I need you to just be mindful that we're not arguing with the Regional Council at this point. I think your opinions have been expressed quite clearly around the table that you disagree with this particular point, and so I'm actually going to move on from that point. Thank you. Now, the next person is Mr. Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'd like to start off by saying I realise this is an urban bit of legislation, and although I come from the Lakes Community Board and it doesn't affect us out there. However, we do have a number of people in our area who have elderly relatives in town, and I have been approached by some of those people with concerns. And also I find that a lot of people make no distinction between a community board member and councillors, and so I have been approached by people in town on this as well. So I just had a couple of comments, and I think my first one was I share the concerns of the Mayor around the cost of heating for people going to pellet burners, and I have experience of pellet burners. I belong to a club down in Mount Ruapehu, where we've put pellet burners in our buildings, and although we're very careful to maintain them and look after them, we've actually had to replace one because it has rusted out, and that was over five years. So they're not without issues, and I do find they are expensive to maintain. You do need to have them serviced on a regular basis, and I worry that a lot of people won't be able to afford to do that. There is a cost to the pellets, and so I have a bit of an issue with the item that only pellet fires will be allowed and not wood burners in some houses, and this has been an issue that's been brought to me by people in our community, especially iwi, who collect firewood for their elderly relatives, some within our area, but also some within town, and that's how those people manage to keep warm in winter. And I'm concerned about cost of heating for those people. I do applaud that you're keeping the point of sale as being the vendor's responsibility. Is that just removal, or is that removal and replacement?
It's removal and replacement.
Yeah, okay. That's great. I'm really pleased to see that in there, because I do know that when people buy a house, they spend every last penny they've got getting over the line. So suddenly being hit with another $5,000 bill would be very difficult. Just a comment on the issue that Councillor Kent raised. You could possibly look at how Regional Council already handles OSET systems. The advanced aerated systems that get put in the Lakes District, and there's actually a testing facility for them here in Rotorua, and the legislation around that is that the appliance or the OSET system is on a published list from Council. So you could easily have a published list that only has pellet fires on at the moment, and you could add to it in the future, and that might be a way around that issue that Councillor Kent was raising. Thank you.
Yes, we have looked at lists, and they are quite problematic. For example, we were looking at tamper-resistant burners and maintaining a list of tamper-resistant burners. If the manufacturers and retailers of burners kept the names the same and the designations the same of what their burners were, it would be quite simple. However, names change all the time, often to get around the lists, which is the biggest issue with the list, but it is definitely an option that we have looked at. And your other concern was, we're not saying that people only replace with pellet burners, that's just new burners. If someone has an existing burner, so if their elderly relative has an existing burner, they can replace that with another burner.
Could I just have a follow-up question on that? I think one of the issues is that I've come across people who are buying a new house, but that's been answered, that's a replacement thing. But one of the issues I've had brought to me from people in our community who are supplying firewood to their relatives in town is they weren't aware that 2015 was the cut-off for fireplaces. I mean, there are lots of people who don't interact with council, don't interact with rules and regulations, and it is only when something happens, like a community worker comes around to visit them, that they realise these things. So I think there are actually quite a lot of people still out in the community who don't even know that they can't use their open fire again. And I have a concern for those people who seemingly have no option other than going to a heat pump or something like that, which will likely be unaffordable for them.
Could I just clarify that even Consumer New Zealand says actually the most cost-effective heating is actually a heat pump. So unless you're getting free firewood and actually not, I think we estimate it's about only 50% at the most of our people in this community actually using free firewood. The heat pump used correctly with thermostat, with timers, is actually going to be a more cost effective than buying firewood and so on. So just wanted to clarify that, because it is a common belief is that heat pumps are expensive, but it's often about people not knowing how to use them. And certainly some of the other work we're doing is around making sure people do know how to use them well.
Now, next we have Dave, Steve, Anna and Shirley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. My question was just around the airshed boundary question. So the one that's in the map on page 51 is just a draft at this stage. It's still a work in progress. So is that the one that'll go out with as part of the consultative process?
And we have just submitted we finally got the maps, the draft map submitted to Land Information New Zealand, so we can release that map out to the community. I think will be much more accurate. It's unlikely to significantly change once it's got to that point.
Your Worship.
Not related, but I just feel that we have lost sight in this as well, and that's not your domain really, about distributive geothermal heating schemes. And how is the geothermal working party looking at where we could implement those in our community? Because it's a no-brainer here. When, that is the right thing. We shouldn't even be talking about wood burners. We should be, where we can, have small distributive geothermal heating schemes. And I know that's not your area, but Rosemary, you might be able to help us a bit. I think they've just started meeting, haven't they?
So yes, so there is a geothermal working party, and there are some successful distributive schemes in existence. There's a narrow geological area, surface area where it's feasible, and for the systems that are in there and people are sharing, it goes really well. There are costs of compliance and maintaining those that sometimes they haven't been looked after in the past, but it is to actually put one in new and to establish all the reticulation is actually really expensive, and that's one of the barriers really. It's something I think if you have it already there and can share with neighbours, but actually putting in a new bore and establishing something new is very high cost, and we have some reports around that, which is really why it's been difficult to progress any further.
Thank you. Miss Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too share the concerns of Mr Thomas and Her Worship around the impact of this proposed bylaw on those that couldn't afford to change out the open fires. And you mentioned before that people that have been putting in the pellet fires are mainly the high income. So as I understand it, those that can afford have done it or have utilised the incentives, and perhaps those that were unaware or cannot afford have not yet. So my concern is, as we move now to enforcement, those people who couldn't afford to during that sort of supported period changeover will bear, I suppose, the brunt of the enforcement mostly. So I was just wondering, do we know the size of that grouping that have not changed across, and perhaps what are we doing that might be help them either educate or perhaps a period where there's a sort of a leeway period where they can change over without having sort of enforcement action taken against them. Perhaps it might be Rosemary, might know that.
Oh, yeah, we've never really looked at being really, really hard with our enforcement on this, and we don't anticipate doing it straight away either, even after this bylaw comes through. There is always an option for those who are in exceptional circumstances, who just completely were not aware of these things, that we can always look at allowing an alternative burner for them if that's what they're interested in. But it's it is a difficult thing. There will be people out there who even after 2 years will still not be aware of it. So we'll look at those as on a case by case. I'm sorry, we don't know what the numbers of those are. We haven't done a big follow up into exactly who still has open fires. But as I said, it's upcoming. We're looking at it right now.
Thank you. My question is around the implementation process, and we have just over 30% of our population are tenants, and they simply cannot afford pellet burning operations, and obviously a number of our tenants are not in those type of homes. The new tenancy regulations coming in are applicable from 2019, where there has to be underfloor insulation and ceiling insulation, but it doesn't make them have curtains. Now, heat pumps are fantastic if you have a fully insulated house. Wood fires, which are currently in use by tenants, is absolutely the only form of heating. Or if you take out this on page 17, you've got wood burners installed before 2005 cannot be used after 2018. That will give them 12 months of no ability to actually have a heating source. And I'm just concerned because I see people actually use their ovens to heat their homes, and I'm really concerned that there is a time difference, and that 12 months could be quite critical that landlords do not actually take this on board.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. We share your concern with that timeline. Just need to remind you that that particular rule is in the air plan, it's not in the bylaw. And we are looking at that timeline and saying that does not give anyone any time, especially having the air plan pushed out now by over a year. It's steadily concertinaing up that due date. So it's not set in stone. I will be talking to my council about that, about changing that date.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for Rosemary on picking up on your geothermal restrictions with regard to the cost. Is the cost the actual drilling and installation of the downhole heat exchanger, or is it the cost of the compliance from regional council that adds to the issue? Because I know that a property that can feed up to 40 other dwellings was going to cost less than $50,000 to actually put a downhole heat exchanger, and on top of that was the cost of piping reticulation to the individual units. So I'm not sure where the costs come in.
I don't believe the costs are substantial around the compliance. It's more around the reticulation. If you're putting them into new buildings that haven't had that kind of heating before, then installing that system and the piping and so on is very expensive. If you've got an existing setup that was built like that in the first place, then that's fairly straightforward. And I guess the other thing is if you're trying to cross streets and all of those other things, if it starts getting really complicated, the costs become quite high.
As a follow-up, is going to be no more expensive, for example, than installing the sewage system, which we did throughout Rotorua in the 70s. So if we took it to mind that this was the way of the future and bit the bullet and got on with it, then I think it would work out remarkably well priced.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rosemary and Karen, for your reports and discussions. For a normal person coming from, say, London, Sydney, talking about air quality, they come in, breathe our air, and they think, oh, this is excellent. This is, they're not exposed to the bylaw that we're trying to change and what we're trying to achieve. What I'm trying to say is that since 2010 or 12, when the new laws of phasing the 550 homes till now has come in, has the air quality actually improved? Is there a report to say that it's made a significant change?
What we found is the concentrations of PM10, which is the contaminant we're looking at, they used to be average around about 100 in about 2008, and there's a photo I think I put in the statement of proposal, and that was what it looked like in 2008. And since all of these incentives have come in and the bylaw has come in, the average is around about 80. So it is declining in concentration. The numbers of exceedances are still about the same. However, we can steadily see it coming down. And of course, we're aiming for 50. And there's a review of the National Environmental Standards coming out one day. We think about June, they'll be releasing some options. They're looking at introducing PM 2.5, which is the even finer particulate that is respirable, so you breathe it right into your lungs, and is the greater evil. They're looking at introducing a standard for that. We're not sure what that is, but we've already done some calculations, and we're fairly certain that Rotorua will still exceed that.
Thank you. And through the chair again, my second question is, bearing to fact that a lot of people that can afford it go towards gas or other alternative heating measures, oil heater or heat pumps. Is there in such a way, like when we have building consent problems, we give them a time to say yes, 2 years? Because where landlords are concerned, couldn't we give them a code of compliance sort of like time to say, hey, look, you've got 3 years to get it out in like a time frame?
You mean to remove an existing wood burner, a non-compliant burner?
Yeah.
We have a deadline of 2020 that we need to meet, which is why the date is 2018. So 3 years, and if we give everyone 3 years, then that's pushing our deadline out. So, but we do give people some time, for example, in winter, if they're changing in the middle of winter, and you can't get someone in to do it, we do give them, we don't want people to freeze over winter, so we have been very lenient when it comes to those things, so we do, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I've got a few questions if there are no other questions from some of my colleagues. The pilot that was put in for the Housing New Zealand homes, what follow-up has happened for those homes that had the pellet burners put in?
It was a pilot that was carried out by Energy Options, and it was about 10 or 11 years ago now. As far as I know, there was no follow-up other than providing them with the burners and facilitating fuel. They found it difficult to get fuel in, and the local community centre took over getting fuel in for those homes. So it wasn't our project, so there hasn't been a follow-up. Energy Options changed ownership and a whole bunch of things happened there, so yeah.
Those homes or those tenants in those housing could actually still be struggling today.
Yes.
With either a pellet burner that they can't afford fuel for,
Yep.
or that may not survive. Councillor Donaldson
we
has something to add here.
Yeah, I think Karen may have missed our last meeting, but we had the asset manager for Housing New Zealand there, and what Housing New Zealand have found is that in the majority of their properties with pellet burners, they're being fed with all sorts of things that they shouldn't be fed with, and so yeah, nappies and plastics and all sorts of stuff getting stuck in them. So they haven't been, in their view, a success for their particular properties, tenants. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that highlights the other issues, because I agree with my colleagues that we're pushing the community towards one sort of fuel which has no price guarantee and supplies not even guaranteed or source. And my other concerns are, is there any subsidisation for those people in our community on Community Services Card to get a subsidised form of this fuel, or any of those options being put forward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the issue is we're not actually promoting pellet burners or pushing the community to pellet burners. They are still allowed to put in wood burners if they have an existing wood burner.
Yes.
So those who are relying on it now. Really, the pellet burner was a concession. Our preference was not to allow any new burners until we get the airshed a little bit more, to get it cleaner. So, for example, Environment Canterbury, who have been looking at the ultra-low emission burners, at these alternatives, and they have banned new forms of heating for many, many years in their airsheds. But they saw the ultra-low emissions burner, for example, as an opportunity to allow people to put burners in. So these are airsheds that are cleaned up and nearing compliance. Nelson, for example, is nearing compliance. It will probably comply by 2020, and that was due to the harsh draconian measures that they introduced 10 years ago. And one of them was no new burners of any kind unless you're replacing an existing burner. So the pellet burner is really a softening of the original stance, and it's only for those who are installing a new burner with no existing burner.
My other concern are for those homes that fall through the cracks. They've had an open fire. It needs to be removed. One can almost make by definition, if it's had an open fire, it's a very old home. It's unlikely to have any underfloor ceiling or wall insulation, and it's certainly not going to be double glazed. So these homes are the ones that most concern me, because they are generally in our older suburbs, and the traditional free or cheap or subsidised or assisted wood gathering that many of these families rely on means that shortly that avenue is completely locked off to them. And putting in any other form of heating, is there any support for budgetary advice for them, and do we know how many fit into that category? Because that's a concern for me at this point.
Yeah, there absolutely is a concern for us as well. I don't know what the numbers of those are. That's just our early work that we're starting to look into, where all those indoor open fires are and what the circumstances are around continued use of those. And I absolutely share your concerns that there could be people falling through the cracks that just aren't aware. Yeah.
So I think for us that we would like a social impact report on that group prior to the final decision on this bylaw. So we have that. This is going out to public consultation, and I would expect there will be quite considerable response to it and reflection back on the issues that have been raised today. And it's really important that we get an assessment of how many in our community are affected, what those opportunities are, and I've got when we move on to our recommendations, I've got a couple of recommendations I'm going to add to that about that, and then we can discuss those. Yes.
We were just having a talk here and had a suggestion, possibly offering it's going to take some time for the bylaw to go through all of its processes, possibly offering a 6-month amnesty for those who have an indoor open fire, and when we can hit them hard and send out as many letters, and a lot of them are, with landlords, we target landlords quite a lot, and just offer them, you've got 6 months to sort this out and get a hot swap loan or whatever, and just to give them that final opportunity, to target them,
Yes.
I totally support the recommendation, but there is another question we haven't asked. Have we reduced the number of admissions to hospital and the number of repeat presentations at GP and primary health for upper respiratory infections and during winter? And that might need to be included. Rosemary, you're dying to say something there, but
Yeah.
I mean, that's the question we should be asking. And we all share the ultimate aim of clean air, but are we making a difference even with the incremental changes that we've done so far?
So certainly that's one of my first questions, the medical officer of health and the paediatricians and so on, is there an impact? Because we're a relatively small place and relatively small numbers, and there's so many other influences on respiratory admissions and so on, they're not able to show a direct link. And they will never be able to show a direct link in a small community of this size. But we know there's lots of evidence from World Health and other places that you will see a difference population, but you can't demonstrate it in a group as small as Rotorua, because there's just so many other influences around the timing of when people go to hospital.
And I used to manage the kids' ward, the number of winter admissions for bronchiectasis and upper respiratory disease, we do know, have they reduced? You can then use that as the open door in any report that we do about what form of heating do they have. It's just like asking the other questions on admission to A&E about family violence. This is about asking the questions, how do you heat your home? How many people are living in the home? And that's a bit of research that we just haven't got, while we all share the aspirational goal of, improving the air quality. But that's easy answer. That's done by DNA reporting. And, you know, anyway, it should be included.
So through you, Karen. I guess, yeah, I mean, it is complex. The program that's running through Western Heights Health Centre, that's run through the health services, has certainly asks a lot more questions around the children they're seeing and visiting the homes, looking at a whole lot of things, including bedding, insulation, curtains, a whole lot of things. So they do, on a case basis with families, do ask those questions, and I guess that's just one family at a time working through that. So the health services are doing that, and I guess there are a number of different programs that are all contributing collectively in different ways to the overall issue around health.
So it opened up a whole lot of questions. I actually had a similar vein to Her Worship, that with this working party, understanding where the children are going home to, what environment they're going home to, what precipitated obviously their admission, and what wraparound services are being put in place, so that if those families can then, through this working party, actually be targeted in both directions. And that's the information that really we need to flesh out this. I'm going to let Councillor Donaldson jump ahead of the others with their hands up, because he's on that part.
Yeah, my comment through you, Madam Chair, was going to be I'd recommend, when it comes to hearings time, that we allow extra time for the Medical Officer of Health. He's been very involved in the process, supports the bylaw very strongly, and it has been working so far. So we're tweaking it here in this proposal. But I did have one question, if I could indulge it, and that was for people who like a flame. The gas fire, the CNG natural gas fire, is still an option. How does that stack up economically?
Well, I can speak personally. We have reticulated gas at home. Certainly the unflued gas heaters are really strongly discouraged as A, expensive, and B, terrible for the internal environment. So I guess from a sustainability hat, the natural gas fires, they're not great for a carbon, but they're better than coal. I think that, again, if you use a thermostat and a modern heater and you heat, you can do it, but they're not as effective, they're not as cost effective as a heat pump, which I'm about to put another one of those in instead.
Now, I'm going to allow a few more questions, because I'm very thrilled that there's so much engagement around the table on this issue, because it really is a community issue. We've got Councillor Sturt, then we've got Councillor Gould and Councillor Kent.
I don't want to get sidetracked in terms of the review of the Rotorua Air Quality Bylaw. It needed updating, it needed a rejig. However, some other factors now under 4 and 5, as detailed up there, have come to light. Most of the lower income people, I think we need to define that more precisely, because under the government ECA scheme, they have been retrofitting a lot of the older homes, particularly in the Western Heights area. So under 4, it says particularly on low-income households, but the area that I'm finding, and I shared that with the Working Party staff members whom I met, is the rented properties. They are the ones that are pulling down the stove. They are the ones with holes in the floors, leaky roofs, windows with condensation, etc. So I just wondered if under 4, Madam Chair, particularly on low-income households, if they're owner-occupied, we can deal with those. But I believe the biggest problem in Rotorua is the rented, landlord-owned, out-of-town-owned properties that, to be honest, don't give a tinker's cuss about what's happening, as long as they're getting their $400 a week. Yeah, that'll solve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt. We're happy to add that amendment to that. Thank you.
Carol.
Next we have Mark, Councillor Gould.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With number 4, when you talk about low income and rented households, have you, as Bay Plenty Regional Council, gone out to people like Lee at the Macoya Association, who's the chair of that, and Owen Roberts of the Western Heights Community Association Brooklyn Road, who's a chair of, they're two very different groups, but they've got the same problem with low economic people living in their particular area and a lot of rented houses. Because instead of going to one house, by going to the association, you could cover a lot more and do a lot more good.
So Marianne Hinton, who's the officer who's on the ground, Regional Council, on this project, has been working with those communities for many years with the ECA program and ongoing with the heat swap. So she has a strong working relationship with a number of those groups.
That, Councillor Gould, that will be covered under that report that we're asking on the social impacts.
I want to get the Bay Plenty Regional Council person to go out there, because then they're getting a totally different understanding.
I think that's a management issue, and we're here really to address the issues of the bylaw. Thank you, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having seen item 4 that's up on the board there now, I'm fully in favour of the fact that we should actually have a social and economic impact report. But I believe we should actually have that before we go out to consultation, because otherwise how can we determine whether we're actually putting the right thing out to consultation? If we should have the report first, make any necessary changes, then go out for consultation on that. So I would like to move that in actual fact this report lie on the table until we have received that report from Council, and that we then reconsider it, and I believe Councillor Sturt is prepared to second that.
We're going to consider your recommendation there, Councillor Kent, so we're just going to test this around the table. Certainly our decision would be to have the report prior to our final decision making. Yes, Rosemary.
Could I just make the comment that this bylaw will expire, and will, if you delay and there is no bylaw, then that would open up a whole lot of things potentially that might happen. This bylaw was put out as long as possible before review because of a number of other things that Council was dealing with, and also trying to align with the regional rules work. So I'm not entirely sure on the legal aspect.
I've got the dates here for the submission. The submission period currently is it will going out on the 26th of May, and it will end on the 30th of June. So if we have this report prior to our decision making, now for many in the community, the report may or may not make a difference to the gist of the bylaw.
Madam Chair, can I just make a comment about the concern over the expiry? A bylaw has a 5-year term, at which point we have our grace period to undertake a review, which gives you in effect an additional 2 years. And from what Rosemary was just signalling to me at that point is we've had our 5 years, and we're looking to complete this very close to the tail end of the 2 years. So the 7-year time frame, I think, gives us that point where this bylaw will expire.
Excuse me, but we reviewed this last term.
In the chair, so I won't comment on how that was reviewed last term. We have got a resolution up there which we will need to vote on. It does compromise us due to the timing. However, it has been moved by Councillor Kent. Yes?
Got an out. As the seconder, Councillor Kent, it does state under that one that the report lie on the table until the report be provided to Council on the potential social and economic impacts of the bylaw, particularly on low income and rented households prior to adoption. The previous one, that was number 4, actually had that in it, just didn't say that the report lie on the table. And I think I'm quite happy that prior to its implementation that we get that report. Otherwise, because of the timings, we could be in a very dangerous situation, and we'd be taken, believe me, when you've got a block of 10 or 20 flats and a bylaw elapses, I'd be looking at if you'd have no power in terms of trying to enforce the issue, and I'd take it to the cleaners.
So if
And I know
words,
one
the
landlord
report
who
lie on the table were removed, then we remain with accepting the report prior to
Yeah.
adoption.
Are you happy with that, Rob?
Accepting that that gives time for that report to be completed. It does obviously put a time limit on it, and it gives us plenty of opportunity to
review.
discuss and review. And then, as I said earlier, we are able to review this bylaw, and obviously we don't do that without a very good reason. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's close to what I intended, but my intention was not prior to adoption, but prior to consultation, because I believe the results of the report should be going out to the public as part of the consultation process to explain why we are making the changes that we're making. Now, I think quite critical here is exactly when does this bylaw expire, when did we last review it, and exactly where do we stand legally, because this is not my recollection. I clearly recollect in my first term on this council, which was last term, sitting round going right through this bylaw.
You're right. So that was in the 5-year period?
Yes.
Chief Executive's just going to address this issue.
I recall it was pushed back, and we also asked that we were more active on the working party.
That's right.
So this is what's come back as a result of our participation on the working party. I'm not sure that the report would make any difference to the community response at consultation, but it could be prior to consideration and adoption, and final adoption. So we've got the right to amend given the feedback that we might receive.
Yeah. As the mover, I'm the
Yes.
seconder of the mover, are you happy that we...
So if you can are willing to withdraw that motion, we'll
And
leave
stick
4
with 4.
and stick with 4.
Yeah.
The mover and the seconder happy for that? Okay,
Good-
thank
good
you.
call,
Because
Rob.
we've got,
Yeah.
it is going out on the 26th. We want this to go out to the public, and there is a time frame for that report to be presented to us by the Regional Council. Rosemary.
I was just thinking, we had a report presented to the working party from the Medical Officer of Health, and I wonder if that was something which perhaps would be helpful to share as part of the consultation, in the absence of that social impact report not being available, that the Medical Officer's report, in fact, may be useful information for the public to have as part of the consultation.
It's certainly something that we'd love to see.
Medical Officer of Health will be coming from a health angle. The angle we're coming from is from an economic
Social
angle
cooperative.
and a social
Yep.
social impact of that particular of some of these changes. I mean, the social and economic impact on certain parts of our community are going to be nil.
Yeah.
They'll be able to afford it.
We'll
What
carry on.
Miss Morrison and Her Worship and others have talked about is the impact on the low income and rented households specifically, and that's why I thought it would be a good idea before we adopted it, the bylaw, to do it. But time constraints, I'm happy to acquiesce, but prior to adoption I think we should have that information. Medical Officer of Health's report, yes, as well as, but
And
the
the
social and economic impacts must be included. I know it's going to be a tight time frame to get that,
Yeah.
Thank you,
but
Councillor
it's got to be done.
Thank you, Rosemary.
So I guess just to clarify, the Medical Officer of Health is a public health officer. He is equally concerned about social and economic impacts. He's not just a medical doctor in the hospital, he's a public health
public
physician.
health.
So he's very much involved with the wider community and our working group. But certainly that report could be part of the consultation as a starting point anyway.
Their reporter's background, the most important for a report that we are looking for is the social and economic impact. Now, if there are no more questions, I'm going to put the recommendations. I'd like a mover.
The amendment, I'll second the amendment.
Okay, thank you. I'd like a mover, Mayor Chadwick, and a seconder, Ms Trumper. Thank you. And if everyone is happy, we'll move 2, 3, 4 and 5 together. I will read those out for those listening online. That the committee recommends that Council approves the proposed Rotorua Air Quality Control Bylaw and Statement of Proposal for Special Consultative Procedure. 3, that the committee recommends that council approves the 2017 contracting agreement for enforcement and administration of the proposed Rotorua Air Quality Bylaw 2017 by the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, to be signed by the Chief Executive. 4, that a report be provided to council on the potential social and economic impacts of the bylaw, particularly on low-income and rented households, prior to adoption. 5, that an updated report be provided to council on the costs and feasibility of distributive geothermal home heating. Thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms Purcell and Rosemary, for coming today.
Minutes. A particular thanks to the staff from Environment Bay of Plenty. This is a very, very complex issue, and the social and economic impacts on different parts of our community have had to be taken into account. I was delighted to be asked to give not expert advice, but my advice to the working party, and you were very receptive of that. So I just think to place on record, Madam Chair, thanks to the staff from Environment Bay of Plenty and our staff as well.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt. Yeah, I certainly concur and endorse that. It is a very important issue for our community, and one they're only too aware of, the equality as we move into the cooler months. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
And can I just add one further comment, Madam Chair, that the term enforcement is used, and we're contracting out the enforcement of the bylaw, but the staff member tasked with that on regional council is called a compliance officer, and so that gives a clear tilt towards the fact that they're more about bringing the community along on this journey rather than hitting them with a brick bat. So
I think that's a point well worth making. It's education as well as assisting that change and wrapping support services around to ensure that the change happens. Yes. Thank you very much. Right, we now move on to recommendation 6.2 on page 61. And recommendation is that the Mkoya Community Association, it's a request for extension of lease, and I'd like to call for a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Gould and Councillor Bentley. Now I'm going to ask JP to overview this report. Thank you, JP.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a very quick introduction. Obviously, the Mkoya Community Associations have had lease on this property since about 1990. They've now come up to their latest lease renewal, and they've asked us to go out beyond the normal 10-year period. And according to our policies, if we go out beyond the 10 years, it needs to come back to the committee for approval. So they've asked for a 20-year lease as opposed to a 10, on a basis of a 10 plus 5 plus 5. So a 10-year lease with 2 automatic rights of renewal for 5 years. Councillors, we've detailed some information about the Mkoya Community Association, and here is some of the reasons they want to do this, and we believe it's the kind of group that we should be supporting with that longer term lease. So that's why the recommendation has come from officers to go to the 20-year lease.
JP, I'll now open for questions. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Should 2 read renewed for a term of 10 years plus 2 rights for renewal of 5 years? Because the way it reads at the moment, you're giving them a straight 20-year lease that they cannot get out of even if they don't want to renew it.
Through Madam Chair, absolutely. I think that's a very good way of doing it. So basically taking renewed for a term of 20 years on the basis of a 10 plus 5 plus 5.
In which case, I'm happy to move item 2.
Thank you. I've got a couple. Just first of all, I've got Councillor Gould first, and then the Mayor.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to second it. My question to you is a similar sort of answer to Councillor Kent's. Why can't you just make it a 20-year term instead of a 10 plus 5 plus 5?
Councillors, I think what we've got here is that we've got the recommendation that it comes with those rights of renewal in there, so they're automatic, so they can, at least there's a reasoning then for us to talk with them on those as we near each of those trigger points, so it's actually just a confirmation that they would roll through, rather than seeing it's established for a 20-year frame where potentially we don't need to talk to them or have them talk to us for an extended period. So it is generally a good practice for them and for us.
Thank you. I now have Your Worship.
I just hope that if they, I'm very aware, as others will be, that they're looking for bigger premises, ultimately, and if that happens, they're fine to terminate the lease where they currently are.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think the key here is that we do have a good relationship with this group, and we would make sure that we're not in any way leaving a punitive type relationship with this. This is a community association who we support and certainly support the work they're undertaking in that area.
Councillor Sturt.
Where they're located, they need to secure a security of tenure in terms of this location, for ongoing funding, relationship with DHBs, health providers, etc., etc. So I've got no problem with it, and thank you, Councillor King, because I had written that down. It should go 10 by 5 by 5. It gives them the opportunity, under the terms of the leases, I understand, our leases, to opt out within that 10-year period. But things change, and they shouldn't be locked into a full 20-year lease. Because that would mean that they, even if they leave after 2 years, they're still locked into a 20-year lease and they have to pay up accordingly. So I think this is a really good way of doing business. I think this is best practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt. Ms Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm aware of the work that Makoia Community Association do, and they do a wonderful job out for our East Side community. The question I had was, I'm just trying to understand if this type of 10 plus 5 plus 5 will set a precedent for our other community association leases or other leases. I'm just trying to get a sort of a broader picture of, is this out of the ordinary, and what ongoing unintended consequences there may be for our other community facilities.
I think in a way the protection we've tried to ensure here is that there is the standard policy of 10 years. So for it to go out beyond that, and I think you're right in asking the questions on what basis would we consider it varying it, that's a judgment that you as a collective body are being asked to do. So in this case, we've recommended that they are an association that's got a track record, it's got the systems in place, and is robust enough that we think it's reasonable. If anyone else saw this and said, okay, we've set a precedent, I think the key is there that they would have to put forward an application saying on their lease renewal we would like to go out beyond the 10 as well, and that would be an evaluation that you have to do collectively in endorsing our recommendation or not.
Are there any further questions on this issue? There appear to be none. Okay, well in that point, I will now move recommendation 2, that the committee recommends to Council that Makoia Community Association's lease be renewed for a term of 10 years with 2 rights of renewal of 5 years each. It's been moved by Councillor Kent and 5 years each. I think the understanding of it is there. 5 years thereafter. It's been moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Gould. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, Ms Morrison, we're now going to, under general business, address those issues that you have raised, and they were sent through to Una. You might like to speak to those first, and then Una will endeavour to... Oh, JP will answer.
Okay. So just to clarify, I did send through to the chairwoman, Councillor Raukawa-Tait. Two questions I had, and perhaps this is due to me being sort of first term around the table. I was seeking a bit more sort of high-level clarity on our kind of governance work plan in terms of specifically our policy renewals and sort of when they're coming up, just to give ourselves a bit more. I thought it may be valuable for us to have a bit of a sort of headway or a oversight into sort of what's coming up in the next year or 2 years. And because I know we do get policies coming for regular renewal, just to have a bit more sort of a high-level oversight. Not the detail, but just to understand that. So I did ask if we could have a bit of a discussion on that.
Through Madam Chair, and it's a good question, and it's the right question to ask about where we are in the cycle. What we've been doing probably behind the scenes is just going back through and reviewing some of the current policies. One of the things that councils have is an accretion of more and more policies, and as you go through, and one of the things that we've looked at, and there's been a recent couple of discussions in central government about policies that are, or legislation that's out of date. So we're going through and we're working with business unit managers to look at what has been in effect superseded by subsequent changes in either legislation or in other policies. So we're going through doing our first sweep through those. The second part of that is once that's complete, we will also have those that have their normal renewal dates that have come up. So the second tranche is to start looking at those that had their next renewal dates. We've been holding off bringing it to council as at this stage because we wanted to make sure that we're taking the steps through the Rotorua review refresh first, just to make sure that when we do start those reviews of those ones that are due and are relevant for review, that they would be matched then against that the 2030 refresh that we've got in place. So councillors, that we have that piece of work coming, and it's just taking us a bit longer than we would have expected, and we are just waiting for that review steps to be completed. The second phase of it, of course, is that independent of that, we've also got the bylaws, and we had a number of bylaws that you can see that we're actually quite constrained on time. So we've actually been focusing on ensuring that those bylaws were the first cab off the rank, so to speak, that we got those looked at first because they have particular timeframes where it's critical. So it is the right question to ask at this stage, but we're waiting for 2030 refresh to be completed. We had the urgent bylaws, and then we were doing our sweep through the other policy documentation or policies that needed to be changed and looked at, and we're just going through and checking those off. The last part of it, of course, is that there's been a number of changes to legislation, which then starts changing that dynamic as well. So that's impacting for us on our general bylaw, so that's the next bylaw we need to start looking at, and the other criticality we've got now is to start thinking what other of those legislative changes are going to drive the need to look at some of our LTP policies within the next 6 to 8 months. So you can see that there's several threads of this that we are just working our way through. So apologies, it has taken us a while to get to a point where we can put a program together, but those are the moving pieces we're just looking to check off before we can bring that to you.
Great, thank you.
Answer
yeah,
your
that's
concerns,
wonderful.
yes.
And I can appreciate it's quite complex and there's lots of moving parts. The only other thing I would say is for our Māori communities, the impending Te Ture Whenua Māori bill and the changes of that and the recent RMA changes are of significant interest to those communities, Māori landholders and incorporations. So just sort of, I suppose, a heads up that those will be quite important for our council to get our heads around and to have processes in place to deal with those new implications when they come through.
Certainly a busy time out there, and often following an election, the following sort of 4 to 6 months is a period of a lot of work happening by the staff in the background as we enter that new phase. So it's almost like a reset after each election, and we've been in that period. Now, you also raised another question about bilingual signage, which I'm going to hand over to the Chief Executive to speak to.
So I think, Ms Morrison, perhaps your question was really preempted by Minister Flavel's call for Rotorua to put itself forward as actually the first New Zealand city that is truly bilingual. Now, if that's correct, I want to go back through where we are to date and where we're looking to go forward. So you'll recall in the Rotorua 2030 refresh, one of the pillars really that have been identified by Council was the unique culture of Rotorua, and within that context, Te Ao Māori, Te Reo Māori were really the pivotal focus areas highlighted there. That's obviously been out and is out for consultation, and to date my understanding is that that has received positive feedback. At the same time, we as a staff group are starting to look at saying what would that mean with regards to our work program, and I'm aware that, for example, the museum, our signage approach is all looking to say how can we move well, not so much move, we already have, because of all of our place names, all of our signage is in fact automatically almost defaulting to Te Reo Māori, because that's the nature of our place. That's where we're to a point where we already are, but we're certainly looking to say how can we further support and to reinforce that, given the commitment under the Rotorua 2030 work. Now, the next question I think that possibly goes with that is, once you've formally received the submissions which are coming back from that strategy refresh, do you wish to pick up the challenge by Minister Flavel to in fact recognise the nature of bilingualism for Rotorua, given our place and given our Māori population and strength? So that's certainly a question for Council, and would be in order to be considered at the point where the feedback from the Rotorua 2030 work and the submissions were actually being summarised and presented to you.
Councillor Gould.
Yeah. Would you also need to put down something about the water due to the judge's comments in Hastings yesterday that they're going to bring back the water affecting the whole of New Zealand sometime in, say, October or November? Because that will probably have an impact on the Rotorua water supply and what happens.
I think that's another item, Councillor Gould. I think we'll just sit with what we've got. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I remind this council of the furore that took place over the renaming of this council and took place over renaming of the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre, and I strongly believe that any move towards bilingual signage should go out to public consultation to see how our ratepayers feel because of the expense involved first.
Any other comment? Councillor Maxwell.
Furore over the change in name, and I do recall we as council the last term, without disclosing it, it was quite a big majority of us were well in favour, and it's been well received by our community, I believe. No furore.
I think I might end that there. I think there's. Yep. And okay, so these don't need any voting on. They were simply items to be brought to the attention. Yes, Mayor Chadwick.
It's not about bilingual. The Minister, it's about a bilingual district or city actually. We're a district. So it's about thinking about where we take the next steps, that's all.
And I'll accept that, and that was my comment as I introduced this, and it was a little bit simplistic, so I apologise for that.
It's aspirational.
Thank you. Yes, Ms Morrison.
Thank you very much for that explanation, Jeff. And looking forward to seeing what the community comes back with as part of that 2030 and having the discussion. And just to note that Te Tātou o Te Arawa will be looking to take a leadership role in accordance with the partnership around this type of discussion. for our community.
Thank you, because this issue has been raised at a national level by one of our local MPs. All right. Councillor Koo, I think I'm going to leave it there. I don't really believe there's much to add. It was issues not on the agenda that Miss Morrison wished to raise. Now, on that note, we're going to be moving into confidential, and we have a resolution to exclude the public. Now, the only matter in confidential to be discussed is to adopt the confidential minute of the 13th of April meeting. The reason the minutes are, the reason is the Polynesian Spa item was held in public excluded session was to protect the information where the making available of the information would be likely to unreasonably to prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied it or is the subject of the information. So that is the reason we're going into confidential. I call for a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. That the committee move into public excluded session. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, we'll just stand and stretch our legs for 5 minutes while we do that. Thank you. Carried.